Obviously, there are many examples of films getting off on the wrong foot with viewers from minute one, but every so often a director might intentionally invoke the audience's ire with a willfully challenging opening scene. These opening scenes generally put entertainment value to the back burner and instead prided themselves on raising your blood pressure, stoking your rage, and getting you worked up for the movie ahead. But no matter how good or even great a movie might be, its fate will most likely be determined by the strength of its ending. Knock it out of the park and an instant classic can be cemented. Get it wrong enough and you'll lose the audience forever. So with that in mind then, I'm Ellie from Whatculture, collaborating with Josh to bring you movie starts and ends designed to piss you off. Up first, the starts that will piss you off. Realize there. Death metal out of nowhere in funny games. Michael Haneke's Funny Games, both its 1997 original and 2007 English language remake, are committed exercises in pissing the audience off as much as possible. Though sold to viewers as standard home invasion thrillers, both films take that simple setup to deliver a savage takedown of both sadistic entertainment and our own complicity in it. The films not only betray the expected narrative structure of such a story, spoiler, the outcome's not a happy one, but one of the antagonists even reveals the ability to break the fourth wall and literally rewind the movie for a more favourable outcome. Haneke makes it clear from the film's very first scene, however, that he's going to be messing with us throughout. The opening credits of both films show the fateful family driving to their holiday home, accompanied by quaint, peaceful music. But then, all of a sudden, the soundtrack changes to an ear-splittingly cacophonous death metal song, Bonehead, by Naked City to be precise, all while the family continues their seemingly peaceful drive. Basically, Haneke wanted to draw attention to the movie's artifice, to remind audiences of the falseness of cinema by assaulting them with the least conventional musical choice possible. And it certainly works, pissing a lot of people off, as was clearly the intent. The Autobot Massacre in the Transformers the movie. There are many ways that filmmakers can piss off millions of people in record time, but few as efficient as brutally killing off numerous beloved characters in the movie adaptation of a classic kids cartoon. And that's precisely what happened in the opening sequence of The Transformers the movie. What with Autobots, Ironhide, Prowl, Ratchet and Brawn all being smoked by the Decepticons like the director's life depended on it. The quartet is grimly shot to death by the invading Decepticons, memorably culminating in a mortally wounded Ironhide getting callously put down by Megatron. Despite the TV series featuring no Autobot deaths, Hasbro reportedly mandated a slew of dead Autobots in the movie in order to refresh the cast. That is, give them a host of new Transformer toys they could sell. These deaths, combined with the most shocking demise of Optimus Prime a little while later, left kids traumatized and their parents angry at seeing their children shaken so thoroughly by a seemingly harmless cartoon. The backlash was significant enough that home video releases of the film included a closing tag assuring kids that Optimus would return, as he did in the next season of the TV series. Mickey and Mallory's Diner Massacre in Natural Born Killers. Oliver Stone's highly controversial thriller Natural Born Killers was massively polarizing due to not only its extreme depictions of violence, but also its intentionally surreal visual style, lending the entire film a disconcertingly heightened feel. And Stone makes this stunningly clear in the film's gut-wrenching opening scene, where on the lam murderous couple Mickey and Mallory Knox swing by a diner for some killing. While dancing by the jukebox, Mallory is set upon by a group of rapey rednecks, prompting her to get defensive and beat the group's leader to a bloody pulp. When the rest of the group comes to their ringleader's defense, Mickey steps in, knifing one to death, shooting a line cook in the head, and throwing a knife at another while Mallory snaps the leader's neck. The scene wraps up with the duo executing the diner's waitress and deciding to leave one of the diner's customers alive as a witness to tell the cops what they did. The violent nihilism leaking out from every frame of this sequence is palpable, and while Stone's dynamic visuals might threaten to paint the scene as cool, that's ultimately just part of the film's pointed social commentary about the mass media's troubling relationship with violence. If Mickey and Mallory's murderous actions don't make you feel at least a little bit ill, no matter that most of their victims were human garbage, are you really paying attention? Paul Kersey's life is ruined in Death Wish. The entire Death Wish franchise is built on the idea of pissing the audience off in the opening scene, which then gives vigilante protagonist Paul Kersey apparently free license to mow down every violent criminal in his radius, all while the audience cheers the carnage guilt-free. The series never did it better than in the original movie, long before the formula ran dry and became an outright parody of itself. The first film opens with Kersey's wife and daughter being attacked by a trio of thugs in their Manhattan apartment, one of whom is played by a young Jeff Goldblum in fact. Kersey's wife is brutally beaten while his daughter daughter is raped, and when he rushes to the hospital after learning of this, he's told that his wife died from her injuries. Regardless of the series' increasingly icky politics, the initial assault itself is horrifyingly cruel. Director Michael Winner refusing to cut away from the sexual indignities inflicted upon Kersey's daughter, who herself dies in Death Wish 2. Again, the anger is precisely the point. The business model of this film and its sequels was to weaponize the audience's rage, such that they'd find tremendous joy in watching Charlie Bronson wipe the floor with an endless fleet of goons and creeps for the runtime's remainder. The sequels took this to comical levels impossible to take seriously, especially the brilliantly campy Death Wish 3, but the original at least fully produced the desired enraging result. A child dies in slow motion in Antichrist. Lars von Trier is a cinematic provocateur if there ever was one, and his 2009 experimental horror film Antichrist certainly sought to grind the audience's gears from its very first moments. The film opens with a traumatic incident in which a husband and wife are having sex in their apartment while their toddler son climbs up to an open window and falls out to his death. The juxtaposition of beautiful monochrome slow-motion visuals and calming orchestral music with the horrific sight of this child's death is enough to jostle audiences. But the fact that it happened while their parents were rutting is ultimately the rage-filled cherry on top. While there are certainly far more graphic and innately disturbing scenes later in the movie, none stoked quite so much anger among audiences, aghast that a couple's absent-mindedness led to the death of their child and every other horrible thing that happens in the film afterwards. Von Trier has proven time and time again that he knows how to push the audience's buttons, and in that regard, this opening might well be his mini masterpiece. Driving round and round in Somewhere. An opening shot is generally designed to immediately grab the viewer's attention, though for her low-key 2010 drama Somewhere, Sofia Coppola came up with something intentionally aggravating. The first 2 minutes of the movie consist of a single unbroken shot of a Ferrari repeatedly driving round a racetrack before finally coming to a stop in front of the camera as protagonist Johnny Marco steps out. Somewhere is a film about Marco, a famous actor who feels little purpose or joy in his life, and this opening shot perfectly envisions the rut he's found himself in, going around and around, dispassionately doing the same thing over and over again. That doesn't mean it's not an annoying sequence though, hammering the point home for 2 whole minutes while audiences get increasingly fidgety waiting for the movie to really start. It's certainly effective despite its patent lack of subtlety, even if you couldn't be blamed for fast-forwarding through the repetitive image on repeat viewings. Don runs for it in 28 Weeks Later. 28 Weeks Later may not quite live up to the brilliance of 28 Days Later, but it's still a worthy sequel that boasts one of the most intense and infuriating openings to any movie ever. The film kicks off with Don and his wife Alice holed up in a remote cottage with other survivors on the outskirts of London. When a boy shows up on their doorstep, however, Alice lets him in, bringing with him a horde of the rage-infected who quickly overrun the cottage and slaughter most of the survivors inside. Don begs Alice to leave the boy for their own survival, but when she refuses, Don abandons them as the infected swarm the cottage. Don makes a mad dash to a nearby boat, just barely escaping before the infected are able to catch him. It's a dizzying sequence, and one which left many immediately pissed off with Don for fleeing his wife and a terrified little boy. But that's precisely the point. It's a provocation, to consider that while we all like to think of ourselves as courageous, brave people, we're far more likely to be overpowered by the fight-or-flight response and hightail it. That a zombie film of all things broaches such a discomforting truth of human nature surely only makes it that much more maddening to watch. The no reason principle in Rubber. Quentin Dupier's surreal 2010 horror comedy Rubber is, in a word, insane. If the premise of a killer tire that blows people's heads up with its telekinetic powers seems appealing to you, know that Dupieux has far more on his mind than that mere schlocky setup suggests. The film opens with a deeply bizarre sequence in which a host of people gather in the Californian desert to watch a film, that film being the very one we ourselves are watching. One of the individuals is a police officer, Lieutenant Chad, who walks towards the camera and addresses us, the viewers, directly. He discusses the fact that many moments in the history of cinema, E.T. being brown for one, happen for no reason. That most great movies contain a strong element of no reason to reflect the fact that things happen in life for no reason, and that this film itself is an homage to the no reason principle. This was Dupieux throwing the gauntlet down to audiences, actively attempting to piss off as many people as possible who expected a more conventional slasher movie, while also weeding out those who would actually find this experimental vision meaningful. And coming next, Josh, with the endings designed to piss you off.
500 Days of Summer doomed to repeat the past. 500 Days of Summer is a heartbreaking tale about a man who gives everything he has to a relationship with a girl who just doesn't give the same. Or is it? The movie, at first anyway, wants you to believe this fact by presenting you with an architect working as a greetings card writer who's essentially a broken man. That is why, when he meets manic pixie dream girl Summer, a woman who shares his love of the Smiths, Tom falls head over heels in love with her. The first part of the movie is a montage of all the wonderful parts of their relationship, but then, seemingly out of nowhere, Summer breaks up with him. Tom, of course, is inconsolable, his work suffers from his depression, and he struggles to even get out of bed. Eventually, though, he does come to some kind of realization. In fact, he realizes that he never really loved Summer. He loved the idea he made of her in his mind, and as such he only remembered the good parts of their relationship. This realization is what Tom needs to finally save his own life, without the help of a perfect woman. But the ending of the movie just shows that Tom really hasn't changed at all when he meets Autumn, get it, another emotionally distant dream girl. Thus, we end the movie with the impression that once again, Tom is going to pin his hopes and dreams on another manic pixie dream girl, having learned nothing. Promising young woman Cassie's revenge. Promising Young Woman tells the tale of Cassie, a woman who goes out at night intending to teach creepy dudes and harasses a lesson. Knowing the justice system so often fails abused women, she becomes something of a vigilante, with her endgame being to get revenge on Al Monroe, a man who raped her best friend to the tune of zero consequences. In the finale, she gets Al alone, ties him to the bed, and begins to get her revenge, only for him to then overpower her and kill her in one of the most brutal, upsetting sequences in recent memory. The film itself previously pitched itself as something of a revenge fantasy, so to see this switch and our protagonist killed feels intentionally deflating, like all hope is lost. Now, Cassie does get the last laugh from beyond the grave, but the shock doesn't wear off until long after the credits. Night of the Living Dead, what was it all for? For fans of the zombie genre, Night of the Living Dead is the reason you have The Walking Dead, Zombieland, Shaun of the Dead, and everything else in between. The movie came out in 1968, and director George A. Romero managed to start a whole new horror movement with it. Of course, one of the most crucial factors that made the movie so impactful was the dark ending. See, the flick spends most of its time following the heroic Ben as he fights his way through the horde of undead monsters. The rest of the survivors that have holed up in the house with him have been made into tasty snacks, but he manages to use his brains to live out until morning. And when morning comes, we see the hopeful sight of rescuers heading for the house, headshotting all of the zombies in the process. We watch as Ben makes his way to the windows, peering out at his survivors, but the gun-wielding men don't see a survivor in the window, they just see another zombie and they shoot Ben right between his eyes. Now, while the ending was always intentionally bleak, Romero's decision to cast a black actor, Dwayne Jones, in the role truly enhanced the thematics behind the moment, as audiences were left in disbelief as to what just happened. A Simple Favor, ramp up the camp. A Simple Favor was a very divisive film when it came out in 2018. There were people that loved the campness, the fashion, and the ridiculousness of the story, me included. Then there were people that just didn't really get what it was trying to do or found it a little bit cringy. Well, for the latter audience members, it was the ending that really put the nail in the coffin. But that's exactly what the filmmakers were going for. While the movie as a whole was not really grounded in reality by any means, Anna Kendrick did give such a great performance that for the most part, audiences were willing to go on the crazy twisted journey with her character. Well, until the end. See, all the way through, we're on this convoluted journey as the movie goes back and forth trying to convince you which of the three main characters is the true bad guy. They're all romantically linked, incredibly deceptive, and following their own agenda. However, the end utilizes the multi-layered reveal trope in a way that just feels ridiculously over the top, even to people who were relatively following things before then. By the time Blake Lively's character is hit with a car by the bitchy PTA mums, the soap opera melodrama has rocketed off into space. The Mist clears up for bleakness' sake. The Mist was originally a novella by one Stephen King, and as any horror fan knows, Stephen King is very skilled at writing bleak endings. However, he's also known for writing very, very bad endings as well. He's even joked about those shortcomings himself. So when his books are inevitably turned into movies, creative license is often used when it comes to the endings. And director Frank Darabont was quick to take King up on this offer, completely changing The Mist's end from open-ended and cautiously optimistic to absolutely absolutely soul-destroying. After following David and his 8-year-old for the entire runtime of the horror, the audience watches as the once strong and assured father finally gives in to the horrors he's faced when his supermarket escape plan turns into a murder-suicide. The father-son duo and 3 of the survivors sit overwhelmed with desolation and grief seeping in, stranded in the car after David discovers his destroyed house and his dead wife. The adults then decide to just give in, loading a gun with the only 4 bullets they have. David mercy shoots everyone in the car, including his son, and then plans to sacrifice himself to a more gruesome death at the hand of the Mist's creatures. But then the mist suddenly clears and the army rides through, the final shot showing just how close David and his group were to escape and survival. The World's End, the clue is in the title. The Cornetto trilogy continually promised 2 things: a hefty body count and quick-witted humor. So there was no question that the 3rd entry wouldn't bring the same combination. And The World's End, for my money anyway, is a misunderstood classic, but I do concede that even I wasn't sold on the ending initially, which is jarring compared to the rest of the film, as well as the rest of the trilogy. So let's back up for a second. Here we follow Gary King, a troubled middle-aged man who wrangles his schoolmates into returning to their hometown for a one-night bar crawl. When they get there though, they realize the town has been taken over by an invasion of the Body Snatchers style alien race, which they then smash to bits with chair legs. So far, so Cornetto trilogy. However, when Gary and his friends get the chance to meet the alien leader, they somehow manage to make him believe that there is no hope for the human race, and what was to be a peaceful takeover turns into an all-out apocalypse. Suddenly, we cut to the future and this Earth has been destroyed and our friends scattered. It goes from the Stepford Wives to Mad Max in a split second, and it's as jarring as anything to see such a genre pivot so late in the game. La La Land, not your average love story. La La Land may not have won Best Picture, but it did win at making its audience cry. In 2016, rom-coms and romance movies had pretty much grown stale, so the director of Whiplash decided, nah, this genre is great and it could be just as good as any of your well-respected Oscar fare. Not content with just making that claim though, he went one step further and said, oh, and we'll do it while also being a classic old-timey Hollywood musical. It was a bold swing, but it worked. And despite being a throwback, La La Land was decidedly modern in its storytelling right down to its ending. See, in this genre, as you probably know, the pair usually get together by the end, but La La Land subverts this expectation. Instead of the couple settling their differences and learning how to love each other and appreciate each other's career dreams, the movie flashes forward 5 years after their breakup to show how the two moved on in life without each other. And at first, when you see female lead Mia with a new husband and family, you think, no, it can't be. She must be on a movie set or something. She can't have moved on. How will she get back together with Sebastian? Well, the answer is she won't. An extended ending montage shows what the pair could have had they stayed together, but then it cuts back to the present day and reality, with them both having moved on, each successful in their careers, but the chapter in their life when they were together well and truly over. So yeah, how's that for your happy ending? Avengers Infinity War, I don't feel so good. For fans of the completely extravagant and intricate Marvel Cinematic Universe, Avengers Infinity War seemed to be a celebratory event in which all of their favorite characters finally shared the screen for the first time. That euphoria didn't last long, however. After spending a good part of 2 hours relishing the dynamics between the new, improved, and larger Avengers clan, the end really comes in and hits you like a freight train. But that's the point. There wasn't one Marvel fan that left the theater not feeling angry and tearful after Thanos snapped half of the universe out of existence. Even with the knowledge that there was no way in hell all of these characters were going to stay dead, it was still an intentionally button-pushing move. I mean, just think how many kids saw the end of this thing and had no idea that the mechanics of studio filmmaking meant their now dead heroes were guaranteed to return. How pissed and heartbroken must they have been? Marvel spent most of the movie trying to convince you that Thanos was the most challenging foe of all the movies, and that the team really had to pull out all the stops, and did so with huge gravitas and pathos. No Country for Old Men, it's the Coen brothers, what did you expect? No Country for Old Men boasts a lot of characters, but it mainly focuses on the cat and mouse and smaller mouse game between Sheriff Bell, psychopath Anton Sugar, and everyman Llewellyn. One day, after a drug bust goes wrong, Llewellyn accidentally comes across the fatal scene of multiple dead bodies, a dying man, and a briefcase full of $2 million. At that moment, whether knowingly or not, Llewellyn decides to risk everything he has for that cash. Old Anton is then hired to retrieve the money and kill Llewellyn. And after breaking and entering Llewellyn's home, Sheriff Bell is assigned to the case to figure out what's the crack with all these characters. It's great, riveting stuff, but as the final act rolls in, the Coen brothers do what they do best, and they up the bleakness 100%. Suddenly, Llewellyn is just killed by random dudes off screen before he can give the cash to his wife. Anton then receives the money and pursues Llewellyn's wife, while the good sheriff retires, stating that he was outmatched by the extreme violence of his most recent case. So yeah, talk about a lack of catharsis. 7. What's in the bloody box? It's been years since 7 came out in theaters. That's years of speculation, arguments, rage, and frustration, and director David Fincher knew exactly what he was doing with all this. The movie follows two detectives as they try to stay one step ahead of an elusive and twisted serial killer that's leaving bodies all around the city, displayed in gruesome and theatrical ways to demonstrate the 7 deadly sins. When the killer turns up at the station halfway through his spree though, with wrath and envy still waiting to be found, the audience can feel that all is not what it seems. So the 3 men drive to the middle of the desert, the killer goading them the entire way with the promise of revealing his last 2 victims. But what the men find in the middle of nowhere is an arriving delivery man with a box. Now, we never get to see what's in the box famously, but it is definitely the head of Brad Pitt's wife. Enraged and despite his partner's protest, Pitt shoots the killer, with the killer then becoming envy, and Pitt becomes wrath in the process. Since that day, audience members have left the movie with their own feelings of wrath as well, as killer John Doe managed to play the pair perfectly, and yeah, it still stings.